So we've arrived at the moment in the semester that I find to be the most exciting, and that is to introduce to you the quote sandwich. So imagine that I ran into a room and I just yelled, "Oh, I kept the first for another day!" What would you think? What kind of questions would you have? Try to think about that. Wouldn't that be a little weird? You might be thinking to yourself, what was kept for another day? Who's the speaker? What was the situation that prompted someone to write this?
What are you yelling
So
about?
what? Oh, now my husband wants to know what's going on. Hold on. Okay, to refocus. You might have some of these questions. These are the sorts of questions you need to answer for your reader when you put quotes into your paper. Otherwise, your reader is going to feel pretty confused, just like you did when I just put that quote in the beginning of this presentation and you had no idea what I was talking about. And my husband was also very confused and came in and wanted to know what was going on. Quotes don't speak for themselves. They need to be introduced so that your reader will understand who you're quoting and what that person was saying before the quote. Otherwise, they're going to be pretty confused. Your reader also needs to know what you want them to notice about the quote. And I guarantee it's going to seem really obvious to you because it just stands out to you what you notice about the quote, but it's not going to be obvious to them. So you've got to explain that. So luckily, we have this nice structure. This is where quote sandwiches come in. So this is what a quote sandwich looks like. Whenever you use a quote or fact from a source, you use a quote sandwich. You never let a quote speak for you because that can be really confusing. Always make sure you make the point and then use your sources to back up what you say. So to do that, you introduce your source in the beginning, and I'll talk about this in a little more detail in just a second. Then you give your quote or your fact and you cite it. And then you tell how that quote or fact supports or adds to your paper, what you want your reader to notice about the quote. So going back to that quote that I just said, "Oh, I kept the first for another day." This is the paragraph that it's from. So I'm going to actually read this to you. I know it's a little long, but I'll point out what each of these moves is doing because I want you to be able to do this. So I'm starting out by introducing this quote by telling about the context. So in his poem, The Road Not Taken, Robert Frost, famous American poet, writes about the dilemma of walking through the woods, coming across two paths, and making a decision about which one to take. So it's a little bit about what the poem is about before you actually get to the quote. Although the paths look rather similar to one another, the speaker regrets that he must choose one and lead the other. We all know what it's like to come to a fork in the road and not know which one is the right one to take. So that's what this is about. So as Frost writes, that's the signal phrase, introducing your reader to the idea that you're about to introduce a quote. So as Frost writes of the speaker's final decision, "Oh, I kept the first for another day. Yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back." Okay, so I put the quote in, and I've cited it by saying, as Frost writes. Now I need to show my reader what I want them to notice about the quote. So I'm going to say a little bit more right here. It's going to say, Frost's words refer specifically to two paths in the woods, but most readers can easily relate to the poem to the millions of seemingly arbitrary decisions in life that humans only have one chance to make. On a metaphorical level, Frost reminds readers that with every crossroads in life, we leave behind the roads, quote unquote, we didn't travel in favor of those we did. So I want to tell the reader what I'm getting out of that quote, what I want them to notice. Now, here's a little bit more about that structure I'm following. I'm going to start by talking about the top and then the middle and then the bottom. So that top slice, this part, is what we call the context. And you see that in red up here. So the context helps the reader know a little bit about what to expect, so the quote doesn't seem like it came out of nowhere. It also introduces the writer and something about the writer. So we have Robert Frost, and he's a poet. We've said that he's a poet. And it also tells your reader about the quote and its context, or what the quote meant given the language that came before it in the original text. So if you're writing an essay and you're quoting from the essay, what happened before you got to that quote that you're using in the original essay? Note the context should be at least 1 or 2 sentences long, and you should start a new sentence when you introduce that signal phrase. Some people try to put the signal phrase all in the same sentence as the context. That makes it feel really compressed. So really write full sentences of context before you get to the signal phrase, and that's a separate part. So we're getting to that part. Now we're going to start describing the middle here, what's in blue. The middle slice, the signal phrase and quote. This introduces the quote with a signal phrase, as he writes, as she writes, or a few words attributing the quote to the author. And then I listed here the common signal phrases, like I said, as he writes, as she contends. And now I'm going to describe this bottom part, what I want the reader to notice. This is also, we call this the analysis. So we have context, middle, signal phrase, and quote, and then the bottom is the analysis. This interprets the quote for your reader. It points out what you want your reader to notice about the quote. Sometimes analysis, and this is the technical word for meaning of the word analysis, breaks down the quote into smaller parts in order to better explain it for your reader. Note that analysis or interpretation is a little different than just giving my opinion. Like, I'm not saying I really like this. I'm telling you what it means. So the word I should never appear in your analysis. Your opinion about the quote can go in a different paragraph if you're writing in the first person after you've given an analysis or interpretation of the quote. So see, I'm not saying in here what I think about the quote. I'm explaining it. So Robert Frost's words refer specifically to two paths in the woods. I'm telling you what it says and how I'm reading it. There's nothing in here that gives my opinion about like what a great poem or what a crappy poem or nothing like that, right? This is interpreting it for my reader. Our last example. So this is a different essay, and I'm going to just read a very quick quote sandwich to give you a summation here. So in her essay, Joy, Zadie Smith redefines joy as a separate, more complicated and intense feeling from that of pleasure. This is a great essay if you have a chance to read it. For Smith, joy is an emotion with overtones of loss and impermanence. As Smith writes, we have this context here. Here's the signal phrase, as Smith writes, if you asked me if I wanted more joyful experiences in my life, I wouldn't be at all sure I did, exactly because it proves such a difficult emotion to manage. And here's what I want you to notice as a reader. Rather than accept joy as a goal to be obtained, she acknowledges that the experience of joy can be overwhelming, and she does not find it to be altogether pleasant. So that's my analysis. All right. Today we have discussed the quote sandwich. Keep this structure in your mind as you write your papers, and I look forward to seeing your quote sandwiches in the future.